Welcome to Mind Your Manners. We are talking HarnQuest for quarter 3, 2025, and with me is Brent Bailey and Aloysius Lachoma. Welcome. We're going to be talking about three articles today. We've got the Companions of the Roving Doom, we've got Arketh Keep, and we've got Hebon Keep. So we are in the southwest of Harn, as you can see on the map here, talking Rethem and Kanday. So, Brent, I'm going to start with you. This is kind of a continuation of some thematics from last quarter, where we were talking Agrikan orders and things like that. Just give us the broad overview. What do we have for this quarter?
Sure. Yeah. Like you said, in the last one, we had an Agrikan clerical order, and this time we have the fighting order that is associated with those clerics. Um, we had last time a keep down in southern Kanday, and this time we have another keep down in southern Kanday. They're not really related too much, but it was just kind of we had these ready to go. But then Arketh, which is the keep of the Companions of Roving Doom, is a good fit with that. We usually in the past have tried to do the clerical order, the fighting order, and their keep all in one HarnQuest. But this time, schedule wise, it just didn't work out. And so we ran with the clerical order. It was done first, and we had that one done last time. But I think that really, there was a benefit there because by doing that one and having it out there, it gave us a little more time to tweak uh, the fighting order, the Companions of Roving Doom, and to tweak Arketh a bit to really pick up on to really reinforce some of the themes of the Order of the Pillar of Fire that we might not have otherwise. It kind of, like I said, it gave us a little more time and we weren't rushed to get them all together. That there were a few things in here that as we were working on it, we were thinking that, oh, let's kind of beef this up a bit to really tie in and drive home or exemplify something we talked about in the Pillar of Fire. Because these orders, the Pillar of Fire and Roving Doom, like all of the other Agrikan orders, everybody's a little different. And they've got the thing that kind of sets them apart. Um, and I'll let Aloysius talk about this, but these guys really are different in some key ways, and we really wanted to drive that home, not only in the article that came out last time, but how do we really make this fighting order? It's easy to kind of separate the clerics. Fighting orders do tend to kind of run together, I think, sometimes. But we really wanted to make these guys different and really make them stand out. And the same thing for Arketh, that it's not just another keep town that is run by an Agrikan fighting order. So we really wanted to make them stand out. But I'll let Aloysius talk a little bit about how we did that.
Yeah, and Aloysius, let's start off with the Roving Doom. Um, Give us the overview. They are different. There's a marine element, there's an Avinian element. Who are these guys?
Well, it was when doing the Companions of Roving Doom, I wanted to emphasize to call forward, so to speak, what they would become, emphasizing that they were not originated from a bunch of zealots like the Herpins or the Momicans were, even though that they were equally legionary in their origin. They felt as though they were more, these were highly religiously motivated people. And I wanted to emphasize more that these are ideological zealots, that they have a belief in a sort of civilizational structure, a sort of view about how society ought to be framed, ought to work, and to emphasize that unlike the Herpins or the Momicans or the Copperhook, these were people who were running a society for 50 years. For 50 years, they had an independent statelet that was constantly battling their enemies. And basically, all their idiosyncrasies originated from this very unique situation. yes, the Mamikins were sneaking around, stabbing people, infiltrating, but they weren't responsible for collecting taxes and organizing levies. Um, Same thing with the Herpins. Um, and I wanted to make them feel more responsible, for lack of a better term. Like they're more immersed in society, that they're more developed in the same way that the early Templars and the late Templars were almost totally distinct from one another. Um, and that as time went on, they became less purely religious and more concerned with things like banking and
Yeah.
small scale statecraft. The companions, similarly, their priorities have somewhat shifted over the decades.
And I think that's one of the most interesting things about this group is they're not just there to be bad guys to go up against,
Exactly.
or people to employ for that matter. They're three-dimensional. We've got a good deal of history with them. We have kind of their social structure built in here. Um, Tell us a little bit about that. What is life like for these guys or as a part of their society?
Yeah, so it was sort of, as Brent said, I think it really benefited from coming after because, the Pillar of Fire, they're all highfalutin idealists. They're not as concerned with like the practice as much as the theory. The companions don't have never had that, you know, benefit. So, I was allowed to think, I can talk about the Eightfold Order all day, but like, unless I actually show what it means, it's whatever, right? So I ultimately, um, I drew upon lots of influences, and I was like, well, what would it look like? And I thought, you know what? I don't think that this has been done, but I wanted to go for sort of of a council democracy system, um, a Soviet, if you would. Um, it's literally what they are. Um, and sort of like this is the result. I get more into this with Arketh, but I wanted it to
Yeah.
feel sort of like as though Arketh was a free town in all but name. That they have this weird government system which has continued because of the strangeness of feudal governance, where it's like, well, they have this contract with the king of Rethem, and just no one's bothered to revise it or change it, so they keep doing it this way. And you know what? They deliver, so not really worth interfering too much. Um, but that was a big aspect of Arketh, is I wanted to sort of make it feel very distinct. Um,
Before we transition over to the Arketh article, let's talk a little bit about the marine aspect here because that is a big differentiator versus most of the other fighting orders that we've seen to date. Um, I know you had mentioned this actually when we spoke back in June, um, but this is kind of a waterborne group, is it not?
Yeah,
yeah,
this was one thing I'll jump in real quick is that back in 10 years ago, when the Rethem Kingdom module was revised and expanded, um, there's a paragraph on the Arketh page in the description about Arketh that talks about the military units, and then there's a whole military section in that kingdom module that talks about this. But the idea of giving one of the Agrikan orders a navy, essentially, to make them, like you said, that those waterborne commandos kind of thing, was that idea started back then. And I believe it was Kerry Mold who that was one of his contributions, was a lot of the military stuff for the Kingdom module. So that idea was born back then, but it was just a couple sentences saying that they've got these three warboats and they've got these, so they have a marine force. Well, that's kind of all it's been now for a decade. But then when writing this article, it was like, okay, well, we have to say that because it's there. But the very interesting thing was is that I had started talking to Aloysius about writing this, and he was aware of what Carrie had done in the Kingdom module and stuff, but there were an awful lot of similar. They kind of had a lot of similar ideas about these guys. I think the similarities in their ideas outweighed the differences in their opinions on their visions for these guys. So it turned out really well, but it was kind of okay. This is where they are today, as we know they have these boats. We know that they have a marine force, but how did that happen? Why do they have that? Whereas none of the other groups did that or anything like that. And so that's where Aloysius's ideas of how do we bake that into the history? How do we make the history then get us to this point?
Yeah. Well, Aloysius, let's throw it back over to you.
Yeah.
Do you see these guys more as like Vikings, or do you see them more as like the SEAL Team Six of the Agrikan orders?
I mean, I would say, I mean, if I were to personally say, I'd just say they're Marines. They're the first ones in and the last ones out. And similarly, they're a much more present, you know, just substantially. And I think that that naval aspect really helps them to sort of be ever present, because you could
Mhm.
just hypothetically encounter them everywhere from, Bednez to the very edge of the Thardic Republic, upriver. Uh, like if you don't go to Menachai, you're never going to see a Herpin. That's just the pure, or I guess maybe Golotha, but they're just basically non-existent everywhere else. Um, Same thing with the Copper Hook and the Mamikins. It's just they exist in their very tiny pocket, but the companions being able to just move all over the place, having these wide-ranging areas, doing stuff, being agents of the government, it really helps them be ever present, and I think makes them a much more interesting tool in a game master's arsenal for Kanday, Rethem, Tharda. You know, Rethem goes to war with Tharda. Well, Tharda doesn't have a navy, so the companions just go up and they just, I don't know, burn down one of the keep towns and just like, what are you going to do about it now? And now if, their Thardic PC is just like, well, now we have to do something about this. It's a
Mhm.
cool adventure. Maybe we have to build a wall, build a navy, something like that, get them into a trap. Or you're a Rethemi. It's like, all right, we're ordering you to help support this naval assault, you know, or it's a trading game and now you're being shook down because they think that you're a bit suspicious. I don't like these Kandans. They're kind of suspicious. I think that we should kill them. And then that's a problem. But like again, if unless you end up in Menachai, the Herpins are just theoretical.
Right. Well, let's, one thing that we haven't really touched on is the Avinian chapter here. And you do have, you know, uh, some page time spent on the Avinian chapter house, which is fairly well separated from the, sorry, there's a little fly here, um, from the
The hunt.
Rethemic
Yeah.
uh, group here. Tell us a little bit about the difference between these two.
Yeah. I wanted to emphasize sort of the point where like it was a convergent culture where they like boats, they like poetry, they really love killing people. And the Yavinians were like, you know what? It's a match made in hell, I guess. Um, and Sort of they had to change very little, but at the same time, those few finer distinctions have been a real serious trouble because, they love discipline, rules, order, and Avinians don't. So, it's sort of I find that not often huge differences can be understood. Tiny differences are that's where the trouble is. And those tiny differences, are a serious source of strife because it's like, how do we teach these screaming morons that, you need to stand in a line, you need to obey your immediate superior? Um, and we're going to do things in a really systematized fashion. Um, yeah.
Yeah, they're
And one
professionals.
and one interesting thing here is that these the original branch or the branching took place 50 years ago.
Mhm.
So there's been quite a bit of turnover, clearly, in the people. So when the Roving Doom and Pillar of Fire first went to Menglana and they established these temples and stuff, um, clearly they were all of Harnic origins. Well, now after 50 years, the numbers are considerably different. And like Aloysius was saying, that the cultural differences are there and it's potential for conflict that really kind of flavors them. This is a theme we're going to see repeated, but not necessarily in the same way when we do the Order of the Cookshin and Crimson Dancer, because they similarly have their roots in Western Harn, but now have a pretty strong influence of Ivinian culture. But theirs is only 20 years, not 50 years. So they're definitely much more in a transition. But that's something that it's interesting. I find that it was interesting to think about it for these guys of, well, they're 50 years on. How has it affected them? And
Right.
now we're going to see it later in those other articles that it's like, okay, they're only 20. So what are the differences? Is it more of a clash? Is it more of a conflict? So, um, this was a very interesting one because it does, unlike the Pillar of Fire, where the Harnick branch is um, has been almost wiped out. And so the Ivinian branch is actually stronger. Um, and so the in both places you have someone who is claiming I'm the grandmaster. No, I'm the grandmaster. Here with the companions, you don't see that. That the the commander in charge in Ivinia is still loyal to the grandmaster back in Arketh. That but what does that mean? How do they interact with the Pillar of Fire? So it was just another, we didn't want to make them all the same kind of
Hmm.
saying, we didn't want to draw a line between these and these, that it's a, well, no, the line's kind of actually at an angle there. So we think that this gives a lot of opportunity for fun to the GM to use these guys, whether they're in Ivinia or whether they're in Harn.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, just to round things out here, of course, we have a number of NPCs that are defined throughout. We have some, let's see, we've got adventure hooks, of course, and those are also sprinkled throughout. So there's a lot of value here. I think it's a fantastic article, and I'm looking forward to seeing what people in the community do with it.
Yep.
With that, why don't we transition over to Arketh? So Arketh is up over this away on my map here. Um, and this is a town, kind of, like as you were saying, Aloysius, almost a free port. Um, give us the overview. We've got a population of 460, so it's a good size. We've got a keep. What else is going on?
So yeah, with Arketh, it was stated again in the revised Rethem. It was founded, well, it said that the keep was built in 602. I don't remember off the top of my head. But not too long after the theocracy collapsed, and sort of like a combination of other things I was doing at the time. I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna move up the refounding a little bit, and then just sort of say that the keep that was later because they didn't have professional masons. They were just assembling it from the spolia over there, I guess. Um, but it was sort of like it was an opportunity for me to sort of touch upon what was it like during the interregnum. It sucked, but more specifically, um, and sort of talk about like how does one found a civilization? Slowly, violently. but you know, um, and to sort of emphasize, this is a small, very tight-knit society which was founded in large part by a bunch of ideological lunatics. And they had a lot of time and a lot of control, and they were able to build it more or less how they wanted. Um, and as such, you could really see it quite literally in the streets because
Mhm.
everything's a goddamn straight line there. Um, there's not a single cow path to be seen in the entirety of Arketh. Um, and that was kind of a result of Kerry's old map from from when he was planning on doing Arketh. But it just felt very appropriate to sort of what I was going for, of like all the streets are clean, straight. There's not a single a dog, beggar, or a prostitute in the entire town because that's just what they are. They have an unprecedented level of control because they actually care about it. I don't think that you could say that the Herpens really have a genuine interest in statecraft, but the companions of Roving Doom do. And I wanted to really emphasize that point that even
So
even their form of governance is genuinely distinct.
yeah, and that's exactly where I want to take this. So apart from their urban planning, the eightfold rule kind of drives everything here. Can you just give us like the elevator pitch on what that is and how that functions?
Yeah. So the Eightfold Rule was a result of like two different early 20th century form of government sort of ideas, where it was a combination of the Free City of Foime, or Regency of Carnaro, which was established by the famous poet soldier Gabriel d'Annunzio, uh, and also the Soviet systems during the early Russian Republic and early Bolshevik rule, where sort of like you would have a class of people and they would elect a representative. They would then operate in a council where they were all theoretically equal, and then they would come to some sort of consensus, and then that was the decision that was made. In practice, not wasn't true either in Flamme or Russia. It was actually one person was deciding on the advice of everybody else. So in Flamme, it was Annunzio, funnily enough, who made most of the decisions. And in the Russian Republic, it was I don't remember who was actually in charge. I don't think anyone was. But in the Bolshevik role, it was Lenin. So, you know, the companions, they do give it more than lip service, but we'll be honest, Bremel is the one in charge there. Um, but I wanted to emphasize a lot and repeatedly, and Brent with, doing the what I would consider the boring parts of writing a location article, really emphasize this point. Everyone's always thinking in this fairly narrow framework. They're always thinking, well, this is the rules of society. You know, this is how we're all expected to act, and what rules and so forth. So it's just totally and absolutely consuming everybody who lives there. Um, I wanted like sort of like I'm forgetting the name. Totally escaping me. The city in Kanday, Aleth.
Oh,
Elite,
Aleth.
yeah.
Aleth. I was sort of like, I want to make the Rethemi version of Aleth. And I feel like I kind of accomplished that, except more extreme because it's smaller.
Yeah. Heightened.
yeah. I thought this was a fun location. Um, it's always hard to bring some of these groups to life in any game, right? When once they have a reputation as like, oh, these are, zealots or, cults or bad guys or whatever, even if they don't see themselves that way. Trying to make them three-dimensional is really the challenge, trying to make it believable. And I think these two articles really accomplish that and really give you a picture of what that society would look like. So I would say it was a success. Now, digging into, some of the other aspects of this, we have the keep, we have the town, we've got something like 30 locations with NPCs and Brent, is this really the boring part of writing?
I don't think so.
I didn't
I
think
don't
it did.
Nice.
no, I don't think it's boring. Because it to me when I'm writing or when I'm working on when I'm editing somebody else's the village locations have to not just say, oh, uh, this is a shipwright and he does this. We it does need to do that, but it also through these locations, you do need to reinforce aspects that were introduced earlier, but you also need to provide hooks to do things with this. So there are people here, and we'll get into. There's actually better examples of this in Hebon, but or ones that are coming to my mind easier. But this is something that we have to do in these. And so when I'm writing them, a lot of times what people will give me is just kind of the baseline of, this is a hide worker. She specializes in shoes. Okay, well, what do I do with that? How do I make this a little bit more interesting? What do I do here? Like in this case, this was this hide worker who is known for, boots and things like that. But one of the things that I did here was that um, in Arketh, because it is a very religiously regimented uh, settlement, and one of the things that we talk about on page 3 is the religious picture in town. What is the environment like? And it's not very forgiving. It's not a very open society. That there are people in town are watchful for and aware of, and very kind of heightened awareness of. Um, I don't want to go so far as to say heresy, but if you're saying things or doing things that are counter to um, what the very limited acceptable religious environment, it's going to get called out, and you might run into trouble. And so with this hide worker, I wanted to give an example of that.
Mhm.
So I added this thing in here about that one of her journeymen drew a design, or did engraved a design in a piece of leather work that is a symbol that they didn't know. They had seen this symbol, but they didn't know that it had religious significance in the Ilverin faith. Well, somebody else in town saw that and knew that it was something Ilverin, and now this journeyman, he's having to undergo religious re-education, whatever that means, um, because he drew this. Now,
He was found to be a counter-revolutionary, and he's undergoing socialist re-education.
so that's what the kind of thing that to me when I'm reading through these is that how do I make this more interesting? How do I make a hook? And I really wanted to give that example of, we mentioned that, oh, people they might be required to undergo religious re-education, but what does that mean? And we still don't really describe it
Mhm.
beyond that. But I wanted to give an example of, here's something that seems pretty minor. It's like this guy just drew something and he didn't know that it was a religious symbol for a different religion. Um, but he may protest that, but no one's going to believe, who's going to believe him that, oh, I didn't mean that. Well, so that's kind of up to you. Did he mean it? Did he not mean it? What does religious re-education mean? How would this affect your PCs if they walk into town and they're wearing something that, it's just a hook. So to me, I don't find those boring, because it does take a lot of effort to like come up with enough examples across this collection of people that kind of give the reader a better sense of the town. It's one thing to say, here's how the government works, here's how the economic work, here the economy and the religions, but to give examples of those in the people really, I think, drives it home for the GM and the reader of what those really mean.
Yeah, I always look to it for that little slice of life in the settlement.
Yeah.
Um, and I kudos to you and the other writers that do these because it's tough to write a short story in 2, 3 sentences.
Very much is, yes.
But you pull it off time and again. So, and then we also have the keep here, and the keep also has, um, number of locations, maps as well. Um, yeah, this is a great article. Um, Anything else that we should throw out here about Arketh before we take a look at Steve Clark's article for Hebon?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
One thing I'll make that Aloysius did kind of did mention this, that the local map and the keep floor plans really came from. So again, Kerry Mold, who wrote the little bit about the Marines in the Kingdom of Rethem module, he had been planning on writing up Arketh and the Roving Doom well over a decade ago, and probably closer to 2 decades at this point. Um, had drafted some stuff, had sketched out these plans, had sketched the local map, and so, but Kerry's been working on other things over the years, and currently his work is really neck deep in the Kingdom of Ivale and the Sindarin work. So he knew he wasn't going to get to this one, and so this was one when Aloysius came on board that he had kind of said, "Hey, I'm really interested in these guys. I'd like to write this," and I'm like, "Well, but those are kind of spoken for." But I went to Kerry and I said, "Hey, if you're not going to get to these," and he was like, "Yep, that's fine." But when Aloysius and I started working on this, we really hadn't been thinking about using these floor plans and local map. That the vision for what the keep was like and all was quite a bit different. But over time, it was kind of okay, I think Kerry had some really good ideas here. And so let's see if we can use this. And so um, we ended up using, I'd say, a good 80% of the floor plans and local map that he sketched out 20 years ago. So that's, you'll see in the credits that Kerry has a map credit because really he drew these, he sketched this. So the design of the keep, the design of the town meshed really well in the end with the vision for the town and its governance and the roving doom. So I just wanted to say that some of these things sit for years, and we try to use it when we can. And there were some changes to it, and but by and large, we used a lot of the same material here.
it's funny because it was largely I had intended to make the local map, um, but I had to go through like wrist surgery, so old righty was out of commission for a whole month. So I was like, well, damn, I can't draw. So I was like, you know what? Like back when I was really thinking about like how would I want it to look, and it's just like, you know what, let's just use this map. It's fine. It accomplishes essentially what I wanted to do. Um, I wanted to make it like much more districted originally, but I was like, it's too much. And again, I cannot draw. I'd also like to go back to companions and talk about my favorite part, which is the 2-page expansion for the King's Law, it- which was again a totally afterthought because it just ended up with this HarnQuest. We had 2 pages left over, and originally it was going to be like maybe we do Masons, and then Masons just blew out way out of proportion. It was like, all right, can't do Masons, and I was like, you know what? 2-page personality expansion, sort of like with the Pillar of Fire had with the significant persons. sort of just going over like it's one thing to talk about the companions in a broad or even a broad overview or about the officers and the chapters. And it's another one to sort of talk about like here's a very particular unit. And I hope this continues because I think it's really fun and interesting way of just sort of like, yeah, here's all like sort of the broad thesis of this order. But here's a really specific example. A particular unit doing particular things with particular personalities. Um, and I just thought it was really fun because again, like I said, these guys could be anywhere.
We haven't
Especially,
told the people what the King's Law is. Do you
oh,
want to just
of course.
define that real quick?
Yes. Uh the companions have three ships. And it's Marathos, King's Law, and Red Poet. And King's Law is one that recently got into a bit of a tussle with some Avinians of unknown origin. Um, and they're feeling a little vengeful, a little reckless, a little start a war, if you would. Um, and and they're on a ship. They can be anywhere on the coastline. Maybe they're the spark that starts the war with the Earl of Tormau.
So yeah,
Or
yeah, it's just that, typically in these, um, when we have a settlement article, like Aloysius said, we ended up there was going to be there was 2 pages we had to play with, and that could have gone to Arketh, could have gone to Hebon, it could have gone to the Roving Doom. It was like, what do we do with 2 pages? Typically, when this happens, we'll use a settlement article because we can do a 2 page expansion of one of the craftsmen or one of the
Hmm.
locations in town where we'll explain more about what that person does, and we have hooks about how to introduce them into your game and stuff. So we were thinking about doing that for either of the towns, but doing it as an expansion to the companions where we really said, here's one of the boats, here's a lot of information about it. We had done something similar in the Thard River article where we used 2 pages to talk about a boat, one of the boats that you can encounter on the river that carries cargo from place to place. And we described the boat and we described the crew of the boat. So it makes a really good package for the GM to say, I need a Talbar, I need a boat, and I'm gonna, the PCs are gonna hire it to go from point A to point B. This gives you a lot of information about it. Well, similarly, here we say, well, here's information about the boat, but here's information about its crew, the captain and the people who sail it, but also the marine company that is aboard to carry out the wishes of the king, or this being ferried from from point A to point B to wreak havoc at point B. And this gives you as a GM, you don't have to kind of flesh that out yourself. It's like if you need to have somebody attack point B, well, this is that. We tell you who's in charge, we tell you the makeup of the group, we tell you about the crew and about the boat, and you can just take that and have them pop up pretty much anywhere that is connected to water
Hmm.
in Western Harn.
Well,
yeah.
on that topic, how about we head south and go attack the settlement of
Sure.
Hebon?
That's a really good way of saying it. Um, and just again, kind of coincidentally, uh, Hebon had been in development completely separate from Arketh and Roving Doom and all. And they just kind of so happened to be getting near the point of being ready around the same time. But it was really only while I was editing these and stuff that it was kind of like, oh, these actually have a really good tie together because back during Izar's war, uh, the Roving Doom was part of the group from Rethem that uh, attacked Sarkum and Hebon down in southern Kanday during that war. And so there's a historical tie between them. But also, one of the things that Aloysius has in the Roving Doom is that there's a group of these old timers, guys that were around during Izar's war, that essentially feel cheated that because of the uh, underhanded behavior of the Mamakan, no, the Herpins or the Mamikins, one of the other orders,
Who's the
basically,
Herpes?
yeah, Herpins, yeah, basically twisted things so that the companions were in disfavor with the king back during Izar's war, and the Roving Doom, those old timers, basically feel that their order was cheated out of possession of Sarkum and Hebon, and that the whole southern strategy of taking the coast of Kanday um, never came to fruition. And they'd kind of like to see that happen. So they still, in their minds, they see Hebon and Sarkum and that whole southern coast as rightfully theirs. And even though there's no uh, activity going on in that direction right now, in your Harn, that could start tomorrow. That they could see this is something that you as a GM might see this as, I've got these guys, they're poised, so let me start using them to cause trouble in southern Kanday. And Hebon is a great place for that to start happening because it has that history of this was a settlement that just a generation ago went through a huge upheaval, that it was uh, brutally occupied by the Rethemi forces for a few years. This wasn't just an attack and a retreat. The Rethemi forces were there for 2 years, 3 years, something like that. Um, yeah, from 89 to 92 or thereabouts, that they were in control of the that southern tip of Kanday. And that really left a mark on the town. So it's just like up in Arketh, we have the town's philosophy, or the writing philosophy for the town was the eightfold rule, the eightfold council that governs how does the religious nature of the town manifest in what we were writing. Well, in Hebon, you have this was a occupied town that was then relieved a few years later. But again, we're talking just over 20 something years, and there are scars that remain from that, both physical and emotional and mental, that the people who went through that, what does that do to you mentally? And so the constable in this case is the younger brother of the Earl of Sarkum, just down to the south, who was given kind of responsibility for Sarkum. But he lived through that attack. He lived through and managed to escape from Hebon during the war. But it's left him essentially paranoid. He's convinced that Rethem is going to attack again. And so that drives his spending priorities. It drives it drives everything he does in Hebon is about, we're going to be attacked soon. So the way that the castle is defended, the way that, that economically things are underdeveloped because all the money is going to other places, other things. And so that's kind of the theme for this article is this is a town that went through this. And again, in the descriptions of the village locations, there are people who lived through this, or you kind of there's a generation that there was a gap of a few years where pretty much most of the men in town were killed. And a lot of the women and children were killed. You've got, there's an orphanage that is there, that you had a whole bunch of children that were left parentless during this time. And so there was a Peonian orphanage that was set up, and it's there. And so that's kind of what we tried to do here, was an example of a town that went through this. And it's a settlement like other Kandayan settlements, But when people talk about Kanday, and a lot of people talk about Kanday as being boring because they're too goody two shoes kind of thing. Well, here's an example of a town in Kanday that really highlights that under the surface, all is not well. That it might seem peaceful now, but it wasn't, and it might not be soon. And so it's kind of a really, I thought it turned out very well as an example of a town that was in crisis and what's the aftermath of that crisis and how that affects the people in the town.
Yeah, I thought it read really, really well. The constable that you mentioned, Steve ended that sentence with, have made him a paranoid petty tyrant.
Yeah,
And who doesn't want to portray a petty tyrant in their
yeah.
game, right? Even if he is possibly right. I mean, we were just talking about those our companions of the Roving Doom. Are they going to show up? Who knows? Maybe he's been right all along.
Well, and
You
this
know,
is
the
really,
Schlieffen plan might not have worked the first time, but you know what? The second time it did work.
yeah.
And that was something I was thinking, you know what? I think I've re-described the Schlieffen plan.
So this really, Carrie, to your point, there is a really good example of, so that bit about him being a paranoid petty tyrant, again, going back a decade to the Kingdom of Rethem module, which predates Steve,
Hmm.
that came from there. So
Oh, okay.
it's a little nugget, but that's one thing that our current writers have to do is they have to kind of mine the existing material about a place and then come up with ways to explain, well, why is it like that? Why is Sovereign Malacca a petty tyrant? What, a paranoid petty tyrant? Why? And really flesh that out. So it's not just kind of a throwaway line. It's, oh, no, no, here's how that manifests. Here's why, here's the explanation, and here's what it means. And so it's, to Steve's credit, he did a really good job of explaining the guy and making him really show those characteristics. But the definition of him with those characteristics was somebody a decade ago. And some of this stuff, and in fact, it may not even have been a decade ago, that line, I don't remember, might have been in the 1980 something first version of Kanday, might have described the constable that way. It's like there's a history to all this material that from the original writers, we have kind of fleshed out and carried along 40 years now to get where we are today. And so that's one of the really cool things I think about the Harn material that Columbia Games publishes is that it does have this legacy of a lot of different writers contributing to the vision to get us where we are today.
Yes, absolutely. And we would be remiss if we also did not acknowledge Richard's art
Yep.
in these articles. It looks like he got to have some fun doing some nautical paintings, and of course, we have our cities depicted. And as ever, you can go over on his YouTube page, and I think he had Arketh up there just this past week.
Yes.
And Ar-
Prominently features, I think, probably one of my favorite, just like random generic dude illustration, which is the Marine. He just have such he has a great character. He really reminds me of like early like 18th century Marines where they're just like it's just a dude in clothing with an axe and a bad attitude.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's one thing that I think over the last 6 months or so, a number of the religious, the clerical orders and religious articles, the Agrikan ones that were originally written years back at this point, the like the Mamikins and the Herpins and stuff. Some of those early articles um, didn't have really good, didn't have as much art as we are doing now. And there were, as we were writing some of these, I was going back to some of those older ones and um, updating those old articles, because there were a few things where there were some discrepancies, and so we were catching and fixing, mistakes that had been made, or just kind of clarifying issues, especially when we started looking at doing a real deep dive for these guys into Izar's War. I kind of was finding in some of the earlier articles where things weren't adding up. And so
Mm.
those now have been fixed to have a real consistent picture of Izar's War throughout. But we took that opportunity to add some new art. And so some of the older articles, Richard has done more art for, and those articles have been updated on the Columbia Games website. And if you've got the PDF, if you purchased the PDF 15 years ago, just go download a new copy of it and it'll have the new layout, the new art, and the corrected information. And that was one of the really cool things here with the Marine of the Roving Doom, is that he's not a heavily armored guy. He definitely stands out if you lined up illustrations of all of the military orders out there. This one really is different, and it really highlighted that these guys are a lighter, they're lighter armored, more mobile infantry force than some of the other than the other ones that are out there. And so it was um, a really good characterization of the themes behind this order.
And just to be clear, we're talking about the guy that currently has an axe getting buried in his chest.
No, I was talking about the one on page one of Roving Doom, the main.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that guy.
Yeah,
Okay.
that guy.
I was a few pages down.
Yeah,
There's great art everywhere in here.
yeah,
Um, well, this was such a fun set of articles. I think anyone that is running a campaign in Southwestern Harn owes it to themselves to pick up not only this set of articles, but the prior set as well. Um, you've got some great stuff that just naturally generates its own campaign. So
yeah.
it's good stuff. What do we
And this
have?
match, I would say this HarnQuest also includes two, as they do over the last year. This HarnQuest includes two Atlas map squares, and even though Arketh and Hebon are in square D6 and D9, those two were done years ago, so those have been published and are out there. So we didn't do squares to accompany these articles. The two in this one are F6, which is the Hephaestus Highlands in the Thardic Republic, so north of Coronan and southwest of Shiran, so that kind of core of the Republic that is all wilderness and very little civilization around it. So that one, I know a lot of people have been really kind of waiting because it fills a big gap in the other Atlas map squares for the Republic. And the other one is I can't remember what's the square
F6
name.
and L8. L8
L8.
is,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's
Uh,
down there where it's where Meldorin, it fills a gap again between Chibissa and Meldorin. So it's that northwest corner of the Kingdom of Meldorin. So it's got Laquette Keep and the Jenin Trail. So now the Jenin Trail should be mapped all the way from Thay up to Berzine and up. I can't remember if we're missing. I think we're missing one square up there in maybe not, because it might be that it's already the Ozil region of between Kaldor and Chibissa. So I think the Jenin Trail may all be mapped at this point. If not, it's one square up in Pegalian lands that is not mapped yet.
well, thanks to John Southgate for putting these together. They look fantastic.
He did one, and Joe McCallum did the Hephaestus. He did the F6. So yeah, again, great mapping team, great writing team. Richard's great as usual. It was, and Bill. Let's now forget Bill. Bill Bean did the floor plans for both Arketh and Hebon.
Yep. We also had contributing credit for our friend Mark Reniff over on Roving Doom.
Yeah.
So I think we got everyone. Um, do we have anything we can reveal about Q4's upcoming release, or should we keep that under
Nope,
wraps for now?
not yet.
Okay, cool. Well, awesome, great stuff. Thanks for coming and hanging out for an hour, and you know, I hope we hear some good stuff from the community as to how they're implementing this, because it's a fun set of articles, a lot of really useful things in here. Um, whether or not you just want a ship to steal or you want some
Right.
good towns, it's got it all. So, well, with that, thank you all, and we'll close things out.
Great.
Cheers.
Thanks. Thanks for having us.